Hi everybody, so welcome back to another episode of Get Rich Podcast with Edmond and Pael. And today, we're going to be talking about a topic that pieces everything together. We've talked about for the past topic. So recently we had the US trade war, and then we were talking about interest rates, diba, and all of these things. So today, we're gonna be recapping and tying everything together in a way that you would understand how does this really affect me. Now, there's so many things happening in the world, uncertainties, all of these things. Diba? We said that you need to be more prudent with your finances. Bakit nga ba? Right? So maybe we can start with the overall, again, like how we do it macro first, like bigger picture, and then how this affects in the Philippines and then to us as individuals. So one of the things na sobrang natin naririnig in the United States, aside from what Trump is doing, is really on what they call the Department of Government Efficiency, or what we call DOGE, led by Elon Musk. So why is that something countries, or why is that relevant or important today?
I guess if you look at DOGE, the goal really is trying to cut all the inefficiencies that happen in government spending, right? So the goal of DOGE was really to cut down total spending by approximately $2 trillion.
Okay.
So the goal really is approximately around $4 to $5 billion a day.
Yeah.
Times 300 days, you're probably looking at close to $1.5 trillion, right? So a lot of dirt, unfortunately, has been exposed by Elon Musk in a way that, they have how many people close to above 100 years old paying SSS.
Mga agencies na...
Yeah. So those were all parts of it where they were cleaning up shop. So I guess including in the Philippines, right, we're trying to create a better understanding of fiscal and monetary policy.
Okay.
So a lot of times when we talked about before was always about cutting interest rates. So when you talk about monetary policy, it's mostly about things that revolve around money supply and credit and interest rates. This is really the role of the BSP.
Okay. Central banks.
Central banks all over the world to
over the
determine what is the right amount of interest rate for the economy based on inflation, based on GDP growth. Diba? And at the same time, on the other hand, you also have things that revolve around government budget and expenditure.
Okay.
Which is fiscal policy naman.
Right.
Okay. So again, two ends of how you're looking at the economy, how they can support it. Just to recap again, one is monetary interest rates. Then the other part is through government fiscal reform.
Okay. So the monetary policy is headed by, or at least dictated by, the central banks all over the world. And pag sinabi mo fiscal policies, governments to. So, like what
Department
you mentioned,
of Budget,
yeah,
Department of Finance.
Department of Budget, Finance. So, for example, if monetary policy, interest rates yan eh. Right? So, for example, in fiscal policy, mga tax ba yan?
Yes, that's
alright?
correct.
So, taxes, okay.
Tax reforms,
Yes.
tax cuts. And to put it simply, maybe we should just go straight to the Philippines, right?
Okay.
Let's say the budget for this year is 6.3 trillion. Everybody is scared because we have 16 trillion worth of debt. Diba?
Oh.
This compares to 6 trillion maybe 10, 11 years ago. Today, it's 16 trillion. So
16
everybody's
trillion.
worried na ang laki ng utang
What's
ng
going to
Pilipinas. Sino
happen?
magbabayad nito eh.
Oh, yeah.
Diba? So the point being here is, in fact, this year alone, we're going to be having around 6.3 trillion in budget. The important part about running on a deficit, people are always worried about, hey, we're running on a deficit.
Yeah.
We got to pay off this utang, right? It's important to understand that the expenditure to some extent will lead into future growth.
Okay.
Okay? So even though it's an expense today, the assumption is that in the future, mababawi mo rin yan.
So parang it's an investment.
It's like an investment.
For the country, for in the future.
That's correct.
Okay.
Right? So, there's always that concern about, syempre, pag malaki ang budget,
Oo.
may corruption.
Yeah, here in the Philippines.
But it's not just here. It's
everywhere.
It's everywhere in the
Yeah.
world. Right? So, the government, let's say you want a clean government, and the government to say, okay, walang corruption, walang spending, yari ka din dyan. Okay? Because you cannot cause the economy to go into a standstill.
Yes.
Because you're held hostage by no spending at all. You don't spur the economy. You don't have a multiplier effect that happens through infrastructure. So example, if you do infrastructure spending, usually the multiplier effect is close to 1.5 to 2 times. What does that mean? You have infrastructure spending, you have more roads, you have better trade mobility, you have better logistics, which brings down cost also. Then at the same time, you have people investing more. because there's better development,
Yeah.
there's better movement. That's the reason why part of the build, or this administration's BBM, build better, more,
yeah.
if I'm not mistaken. Part of it is airports, right? So at least tourism, you boost the local economy, you boost the provinces, you boost everything in general. So when you talk about infrastructure spending, it's not just a one-time effect.
Yeah.
Right? There's that long-lasting impact, and actually infrastructure probably has the highest
Multiplier effect.
highest multiplier
among
effect, which is close to 1.5 to 2 times.
of everything. So of course, diba, even if we say that corruption is there and that's a reality, we're not advocating that. We're all for good governance and servant leadership, but that's the thing that's happening all around the world and in history. Maybe on a personal approach, if you mentioned you would see these budgets. There's budget for education, agriculture, tourism, infrastructure. So maybe as a person, how does this affect me? So should I create businesses within that vertical? Should I invest in sectors na damay yung may ganung budget? So what do you think is maybe the wisest move to position ourselves today?
And I think that's also part of the reason why you've seen real estate prices go up significantly over the last 10 years.
Build.
Part of it, I mean, you look at the budget this year, 1 trillion, close to more than $1 trillion goes to the Department of Education.
Yeah.
The second largest is DPWH, which is Public Works and Highways. Then I forgot the next series of the budget, but I think you have another 300 billion in defense spending.
Okay. Yeah.
Another 250 billion in agriculture, so on and so forth.
Yes.
Right? I think the point being here is when you're positioning, especially from businesses and for the SMEs, right? Whatever happens on the spending on the provinces, indirectly you also benefit. And that's the reason why you're seeing more tourism. Tourism hasn't gone up. Sorry, I take that back.
Yeah.
But the goal is to boost tourism generally across borders, right? Make it easier access for people to go around. And I think at the end of the day, whatever you're seeing from the Department of the government spending, should translate into better revenues down the road. And that's what we're really, really hoping for, right? That 98 projects of that BBM is close to 8.5 to 9 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, in total government spending, will have that trickle-down effect economics so that the normal person
would benefit,
and it actually disperses more, not just from the Metro Manila, but even outside. And I think that is key for having a sustainable economy.
Right. We talked about government spending and then debt. So right now our debt to GDP ratio is about 60% something. So that's something to worry about. Kasi you would see other countries have more than 100%. Right? Sa Philippines yan, parang okay, ang taas na ng utang natin. Currently, this administration has the biggest one when you compare it to other administrations. But of course, we also need to consider that maybe a bulk of that is interest payments. So is it something that we should really be worried about? Does it affect our currency, our purchasing power, our inflation, growth?
So
how should we look at that?
So more important than the debt we talked about a while ago, which was 16 trillion, is actually debt to GDP.
Yes.
You're correct also in saying that it's running at 60% today.
Yeah.
Pre-pandemic, you were probably looking at 35 to 40%.
So over the past 5 years.
So over the past 5 years, there's really been a balloon.
Right?
But you could blame the COVID pandemic, that's ayuda and everything. That was the main culprit for higher debt to GDP. But again, the assumption is that we have to find ways to pay that down over time, right? And usually when an economic downturn happens, so some of the countries that have high debt to GDP, so US, Japan, China, right? When there's an economic recession or any problems that are happening outside, usually the ones that get affected the most are the poorer countries. So it's really normal that countries such as us are prudent in spending. And because you don't want to have that volatility in that currency, because it can spur more outflow, more problems on the monetary side. And that would actually cause a larger issue down the road. That's the reason why everybody is trying to be prudent, keeping their wallets tight with regards to spending, because they don't want to overspend. Because if you overspend and it's not leading to anything like ghost cities or whatsoever, then you have a problem. Diba? So the assumption is that there's always some trickle-down effect that's happening somewhere else.
Okay, when it comes to the government spending. So, for example, in the case of the peso, Is it something that we should be worried about na, the Philippines wouldn't be competitive na kasi dami na namang utang and we're like a developing country.
Okay, so the best part about the
diba?
reason why we can stomach all that volatility also in the Philippines, it's because unlike other countries, which is largely export-oriented,
Yeah.
Philippines is a human export.
Or human traffic.
Hindi naman human traffic. Human export.
Human export.
Yeah. So good part is you're looking at close to maybe I'd probably say like more than $100 billion already
there you go. Yeah.
coming into the country from OFWs, and a larger part actually coming from service export.
Yeah.
So service export is BPO
related.
plus the VAs that we talked
Yeah.
about, the additional 2 million VA, 1.5 to 2 million VAs in the country, which actually contributes close to $60 billion in service export a year. So that's the best part because this is dollar terms.
Yes.
And whenever you're having a weaker currency,
You have that supply of
better for them,
Yeah.
right? They bring home more money, they get paid
money,
more.
Yes.
Right? So that's actually a good part for the local
For
economy.
the Philippines. Okay. Talk about DOGE and then fiscal monetary, and then we're trying to pay out these debts. So I think one of the most recent news right now is yung capital gains tax. Diba na 10% from 6% to 10%. So parang, and if the government is looking for ways to pay our debt, so how is that going to affect?
Okay, maybe not just
Diba?
that 6 to 10%. I
Oo.
mean, it's largely criticized,
Yeah.
right? But I guess the goal really is the government needs more revenue.
Yon. Okay.
Okay, so let's just because of the 6.3 trillion
Trillion.
expenditure,
Try
right?
to
Spending,
cut it down.
cut
diba?
it down.
Yeah.
I think you're probably looking at 4.4 trillion in revenues last year.
So the government is trying to increase
Sure,
that.
you need to increase government revenues to pay off the expenditure, right? I think the budget deficit this year is running around 5.5% per GDP. Pre-pandemic, you're looking at close to 3% deficit. So it is. We're running at a higher deficit today than we were before, right? So you gotta catch up in terms of collection and revenue. That's why they're doing everything to increase digital tax.
Yeah.
The underground economy.
So they're really trying to structure yung tax natin sa Philippines.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? So I don't want to say it, but even on the digital VAs and everything, syempre, hinahabol din sila natin, di ba? Parang paano magbayad ng tax? Binabayaran mo ba tax mo? Tama ba? Dinedeclare mo ba?
Yeah.
All these things that the government from a fiscal policy side is really
So yan, fiscal policy, diba?
is
Yung
really
tax.
trying to find ways to increase government revenue. That's the reason why BAR might be coming knocking on your door, customs, etc., etc., and all these things are seeing it from their lens on how they can boost revenues and tax collection.
So we need to really file our taxes and be more diligent. Okay, so to put everything in a maybe in a nutshell. So what's happening right now in the Philippines? So we have this government deficit, and then we're trying to increase the revenue, which is where we're using fiscal policy to increase the taxes and really structure everything out. And then for the past episodes, we talked about interest rates. So does this mean when with our BSP, like monetary side, nag-decrease tayo ng interest rates, would that mean it would also result to a lower interest payments for our debts? Also work that way?
To some extent, yes. The reason why central banks also try to keep interest rates down is because you need to spur economic activity.
Yes.
Right? So that if the government borrows in the more at cheaper interest rates, then you have to pay less. As simple as that. Same case with most of the corporates. If you have cheaper interest rates, then even private companies can borrow more at cheaper costs and use that to spur investments into the country. Right? That's the reason why last episode we really talked about corporates cannot really stop spending. And that's the reason why we related it back into SM and their 100 billion capex. Same goes still today. I mean, if cost of borrowing is cheaper, then the tendency for companies is, okay, I'll borrow cheaper costs, and I actually can invest more into the Philippines or in certain cities or in certain provinces, and it would actually be better for everyone else.
Yeah.
Because you have more jobs,
Yes.
you have alternatives, hopefully wages also increase. And usually the ones that get affected the more are the ones that are in need of basic needs. So if you look at the poverty level in the Philippines, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's still at 15%. This came from 18% a few years back. So the problem is the median household average, you're probably sitting at 20 to 22,000, which is not enough, right? So say household maybe making 44,000, it's not enough, right? For most of the basic needs. That's the reason why you need to have better infrastructure so that at least they're the ones who benefit the most from what's happening.
In the current cycle that we're in now, so we're in a cycle that happened. The pandemic, the business closed down, and in order to stimulate the economy, they printed money, and then they decreased they almost to zero, close to zero, yung interest rates, and that's the reason why we're having this big jump of debt from 35% in the Philippines up to 60% now. So with that, what's the best parang investment option today? Kasi di ba last episode, we need to be prudent, there's uncertainty, but at the same time, we always tell them that they need to stay invested.
Well, so I guess that's the reason why if you look outside, we always talk about mega trends, right?
Yes.
At the end of the day, Philippines is still a consumption-driven economy. So what that means, if it's a consumption-driven economy,
Right.
if you boost provinces and people's spending, indirectly, consumers will start to eat more
Yeah.
in restaurants,
Yes.
more shopping, buy more clothes, and obviously that bodes well for
Yeah.
the SME and for the investors, right? And that consumption-driven story is, I think, very key. That's the reason why education is so important.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the total number of graduates above 5 years old. I think it's increasing. It is increasing. I don't know what the final number is. I think it's the age above 25, the total number of college graduates is sitting close to 24-25%. So that's not actually high enough, right? It's just 1 out of 4. So you're trying to create higher value in terms of employment. So from construction workers, household help,
Yeah.
get them better skill levels, get them improving on that value chain, and then you'll start to see more improvements across the board in Philippine consumption going back. And that's the reason why you go to the malls, dapat dumadami ang tao, diba? And that's the reason why SM continues to spend, because they still understand that we're still in this consumer megatrend story and we're still far away from everybody else.
Yes.
Where rich countries are sitting at $45,000 GDP per capita, while us, we're still sitting at $4,500.
Grabe, no? 10 times pa.
10 times
pa.
the spending, diba?
Kasi parang, I think ever since 2025 started, we were always talking about uncertainty and everything. But when you take a look at the zoom out mo, the Philippines naman talaga, I think we're in a position of growth talaga, right? Like,
Well, we still have a long way to go.
Long way to go.
Yeah, long way
but
to
there's
go.
so much opportunities ahead for the Philippines.
Yeah,
Right?
and
You would see provinces na wala pang masyadong developments, and then you would see build. There's so many investment that's coming into for our future. Filipinos should remain hopeful. Should Filipinos still remain hopeful?
as long
for
as
this?
they're
Yeah.
building it well, I think
Yeah.
that's key. Like, I went to Tagaytay in the Holy Week,
Yeah.
jam-packed.
Traffic.
Traffic, diba? But what surprised me the most about Tagaytay was that before there's only that one road stretching from
Yung exit ng SLEX to Tagaytay. Yung ba yun?
Lampas ng Santa Rosa.
Yeah.
There's that main road. Now you can actually, there's like bypass roads on the back, which are like 4 lanes.
Yeah.
Which is great, right? So people don't get congested into one area. Now you can even build at the back. But they also built a bridge on that main Tagaytay road, and I was also surprised because it's an obstruction of view. But anyway, point being here is that you're starting to see more avenues. That's the reason why they're trying to disperse all the traffic. Diba? Same thing, I assume, with Baguio. Baguio before, pag pupuntahan mo, wala naman traffic eh.
Yeah.
Ngayon, it's so difficult to get to Baguio because of the number of cars going up and down. Diba? And till today, that's the reason why you're seeing that level of congestion. But congestion is also good.
Yes.
Because that means there's
Economic activity.
money, there's economic
Yeah.
activity, there's money being spent there, right? So all these things, again, going back to basic necessities and basic goods, education is key. That's probably the reason why Department of Education is the number one on our budget in terms of expenditure, right? That's the reason why. Not just that, and part of education and infrastructure. And I agree, those are probably the top 2 sectors that are most important, together with food security and energy security.
Yeah. In our space, we always tell that expectation is very important. When you're investing, what's your expectation? What's your trade plan? When you're trading, what's your expectation on what's going to happen to that issue, to that stock? And this topic of budget, ganyan, ano ba yung expectation natin na we're seeing this budgets go to here, Department of Education, infrastructure. So what do you think should be our expectations to these investments or government spending?
Don't have any expectations for government.
Para hindi na tayo masaktan.
Para hindi ka masaktan, diba?
Huwag na tayo mag-expect.
it's hard to. I'll just give an example now.
Yeah.
As an entrepreneur, especially from a real estate, so let's say you're going to a different city or barangay.
Yeah.
Normally, if you're looking to buy real estate to some up and coming barangay or city, actually the first thing that you should be looking for is Mercury Drug, Jollibee, and McDonald's.
Okay.
Once you see all three, then you know, and there's people in it, then you know that's actually a good place to start investing in.
So parang you're saying that they should start a local business in there?
So, mauna na sila.
Oh, yeah.
Kasi by the time, pag wala sila, that means wala pang traffic doon. There's not enough transactions and traffic. That's the reason why they don't open up there. But once they open up Mercury Drug, Jollibee, and McDonald's, you know,
Yeah.
nandyan na yan, may traction
demand,
na yan. There's a reason why they opened up in that area. And I always tell people, nobody wants to be first. Nobody wants to take that leap of faith.
You want that confirmation.
You want that confirmation. That's the reason why you look for those signs as signals for you to start putting money or investing in real estate there. Diba?
So for example, let's say wala silang capital for real estate, and diba, and with real estate prices right now, it can be quite challenging, right? So maybe they start a local business there, or franchise ba, or something.
Well,
or sila na bahala, diba?
I'm just pointing out from
yun yung growth na
yun yung growth indicator.
Yeah,
Yun lang
growth
yung one of the
indicator.
growth indicators.
That's
I mean, whatever you do,
Yeah.
bahala ka.
Oh.
I don't have an answer for that. But these are like growth indicators for me to see, okay, parang may nagbabago dito.
Kung may Dali na doon, may 7-Eleven.
Actually, I wouldn't say Dali or Alphamart. I saw like 4 or 5 Dalis and Alphamart, and like what we talked about last time, they're doing extremely well. For several of them, I didn't see anything else there. It's just them, which is great because they're a great alternative for the people that are in that housing. But for business-wise, parang aside from them, it's very difficult in my opinion, unless you live there and you're servicing that side of the business.
With all that we talked about today is understanding yung government spending. I think having the right expectations.
Or understanding,
right? Diba?
or having a good understanding of economic activity.
Yeah, economic activity. And understanding fiscal and monetary policy. I think that's very important for us to understand so that everything that we're hearing or learning about in the news, it's put into context.
Yeah. And I think it's more about directional than anything else, right? So meaning, on the case of monetary policy, if the BSP, for example, is raising interest rates, right? Because they're trying to stop inflation or slow down the economy, at least you know. Na, okay, from a business owner, SME, teka.
Yeah.
I gotta think twice before I start investing more, right? Because my borrowing cost is gonna go higher. The government is already giving me the signal that they want to slow down the economy. Or in today's case, where they're cutting interest rates, right? They're trying to boost economic activity. Then maybe it'll actually be a good sign for you also. Uy, may excess cash ako. Parang, okay, so these are things that, take into consideration from a business decision.
Maybe just to cap things off, and one last question. Currently, we're seeing the dollar is weakening, right? And when the dollar is weakening, you would see, yung nga, parang topic natin last time about recession and everything. How is that important for Filipinos? Kasi we have so many OFWs, freelancers that are also dependent on the value of the dollar. But sometimes, even if the dollar is going down and we're dependent for that as our income, and that also creates opportunities in the equity markets or some other avenues in our market. So how should we look at that?
I guess the best way is usually a strong economy has a stronger currency.
Yeah.
That's the reason why people don't like it when your currency is weak. So when your peso went from 50 to 58, syempre natatakot ang mga Filipino eh. Kasi mahinang currency eh, diba? So to some extent, yes, there's a buffer because you have more. It's beneficial for the OFW and the BPO. But net, usually it's a concern because it tells you, hey, the economy is actually slowing down. That's the reason why you're having
a
weakness
currency
in the currency. Could also mean that you're having foreign outflows, which did continue the last few years, right? These are actually not good signs, and that's the reason why a weak currency is a concern. But normally when I tell people is look at vis-a-vis everybody else. So if we're weak and everybody else is much weaker than us,
that
right?
means we're stronger.
Oh,
Or at least we're not that weak.
Yeah, we're not that weak, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
more what's happening could be just be a rebalancing that's happening from a global
Okay.
economy.
Okay.
So it's just an outflow from the entire emerging market or Asia Pacific back into the US. Same case today, where you're seeing the weakness in the dollar. Who's benefiting? Everybody else. Well, generally, everybody else, right? Except for some countries that are directly impacted. So I guess that's a good side about how you're viewing the currency. Today, euro is in a advantage, right? So you're seeing more inflows happen in Europe than anywhere else, diba? So hopefully this inflows continue to come in, and the best part about having a strong currency is because a lot of central banks are afraid to cut interest rates today because their currency will weaken
Against the dollar. Yeah.
right? And you don't want to have a scare on your local currency. So because
The dollar is weakening.
the dollar is weakening,
Yeah.
now you're seeing more room to cut on everybody else.
There's confidence for the central banks to cut.
cut,
Which
right?
is happening in the Philippines.
which is
as well.
happening in the Philippines
There you have it.
as we speak. Right now, the interest rates was cut to 5.5%,
Yes. Which is a monetary policy.
which is monetary policy.
Yeah.
With our inflation slowing down,
Yeah.
right? I think these are maybe better signals, right? Can we cut more? The answer is yes. Will that directly lead into economic spending and activity right away? The answer is no. But the assumption is that over time it will,
It will. Okay.
right? So there's also that timing aspect about it, right?
Yeah.
And usually what we tell people is in a rate cut cycle, it's actually better for equities, right? Because it takes time, but
Yeah.
but you got to start investing today.
Yeah.
Then later on, diba? That's always how it is.
Parang you start accumulating na. Parang positioning yourself so that when the businesses are ready to, borrow more because of the lower interest rates, you're
And
already
do more,
positioned.
you're already positioned.
Yeah,
diba?
beautiful. And so that's the reason why, we talk about these things to really keep you updated on what's happening and really try to help you understand yung mga financial jargons out there. Yes, it might be overwhelming at times, but the reason why we do this is so that it could be simpler for you guys to understand these things and then really to make it, applicable in your day-to-day life. Kasi, yeah, the world is ever-changing. It's so fast. So we want to thank you for tuning in today. Anything else? I think that's a great way to cap it off.
I think that's really the purpose of today's discussion,
Yeah.
right? Is try to give people a better understanding, whether you're an investor, small, medium entrepreneur,
Yeah.
basically what's happening from a macroeconomic perspective and trying to give you directions or signals to tell you whether you want to be more prudent or you want to be more
exactly.
aggressive.
Yeah.
Because the tendency for a lot of people is to reinvest everything that you make. So meaning all-in ka ng all-in because you're doing well,
Yeah.
right? And then you don't know that
Ito na pala nangyayari.
things are already
Yeah.
slowing down and you're still so aggressive, right? So you gotta learn how to step on the brakes a bit and be more patient. At the same time, when things are already slowing down and there's already opportunity, right? Yeah, at least you're liquid enough and you have the war chest enough to reinvest and buy at
At a discount.
a
Or
discount
a good
versus
price.
everyone
Yeah,
else.
So yeah, I hope this episode really brought you guys clarity and a proper expectation on what's about to happen or what's currently happening in the Philippines, and not just in the Philippines, but all over the world. And again, we want to thank you for tuning in today. We reached several milestones over the past weeks.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
That's
so
great to hear.
Thank you so much. So just in case you're not yet subscribed, please do subscribe and follow us. We're also on Spotify. So pag nagko-commute kayo while you're driving, sana we can accompany you on your commute. So again, thank you everybody in watching. So stay tuned on our next episode.
All right. Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.